Mr. Lamberts, just this idea that Michel Barnier has decided to stay for longer now in London, how should we look at that? How do we interpret this?
Well, that we have entered the final stretch of the negotiation. I think that indeed the British government ultimately wants a deal. So we are going to do our utmost to have one. I have limited hopes as to what that might entail, but at least now the perspective is that we might have a deal after all.
Right. You say the UK government now wants a deal, but how about Europe? Do you want a deal? And most crucially, when do we get it? Do you think mid-October? Is that realistic?
Well, there's never been doubt as to whether the European Union wanted a deal. We do want a deal, not under any conditions, but we want one. But there were doubts as to who would win in the entourage of Boris Johnson, the hardliners who actually want to cut all ties with the European Union, or those who want a more cautious approach respecting geography in that the European Union is the closest neighbor to the United Kingdom. Now, both parties, I think, want a deal. Can we have one by mid-November? Yes, we can. The question is how deep will be this deal, and there I would have limited ambitions. I mean, this won't be as good as the membership of the European Union. In other terms, even if you have a no tariff, no quota agreement, there will still be checks at the borders, regulatory checks between the United Kingdom and the European Union, and that will indeed create friction in trade between the two.
What would you say is now the main sticking point? I wonder, because we've heard a lot about fish, and we know the French have taken a very strong, tough position on that. So what is the major sticking point that's preventing the deal at this stage?
Well, it's not fish. Fish is of course, symbolically big, but economically small. The real thing is about level playing field and the way you enforce this. So it's the governance aspect linked with the level playing field provisions. And these are major sticking points because, of course, the United Kingdom doesn't want to be forced to align to EU legislation. But on the other hand, if it wants to keep access to the single market, it has, in a way or another, follow EU legislation. So how do you do that without the hard Brexiteers losing face? Well, that's the whole question.
And you talk about fair competition. So I do wonder, in a world where there's a trade deal and the UK has fully left the European Union, how much do you fear the UK as a competitor to the EU?
Well, I don't fear it. I mean, the United Kingdom is part of the single market at the moment, and we have nothing to complain about. Of course, we don't like a number of provisions of the UK labor law, but in environmental terms, for instance, well, we might see the United Kingdom being more proactive than some member states like Germany. So I'm not too much afraid of that, especially as we are talking about trade in goods, not trade in services.
And when you talk to officials here in Brussels, the more hawkish voices do say that ultimately the Prime Minister does need a deal more than the Europeans do, that this is going to hurt the UK economy more than it will hurt the EU. And this is happening while coronavirus is happening. So he has no other option but to get a deal. Is that a fair interpretation, would you say, of the Prime Minister thinking at this point?
Well, I'm not in Boris Johnson's head. I think that the predicament of the United Kingdom is dire at the moment, obviously, and it's true that no deal would hurt proportionately more the United Kingdom than the European Union. But I think that language, to the extent that the United Kingdom is cornered and has to make all the concessions, is not conducive to a deal. So I would refrain from using that kind of language because I think it's in both parties' mutual interest to have a deal.
And I have to ask you about the calendar, because here it really does matter. The transition period will end by the end of the year. So if we assume best case scenario that we do get a deal by November, when does it get put to a vote in the European Parliament, and how easy will that vote be approved or be pushed through?
Well, it really depends on the quality of the deal. Personally, I have a lot of trust in our negotiating team led by Michel Barnier. So far, we have had no surprises from his side. And since he consults with the European Parliament more than weekly basis, there will be no surprises. And so I guess that the deal will be approved by European Parliament, unless, of course, we have surprises in terms of concessions made by the EU negotiators that would be unpalatable for the European Parliament. But I don't think that this scenario is very likely.
Okay, so when is the actual deadline? I mean, when's the real deadline here?
Well, actually, we really need that in the first half of November because, well, there's a due process to be observed. I mean, the Parliament is not an instance that is just a rubber stamping document. So we have to have at least 4 weeks to process this correctly. And by the way, don't forget that the British Parliament has to process the treaty as well.
Which was my next question, by the way. How problematic could that be? We know it was very problematic in the past. Do you think it can get approved easily? Is that something that worries you at this point or not?
No, I'm not worried about that. Boris Johnson enjoys a big majority, and despite all the infighting, I think that should be no problem for his majority.
And Mr. Lambert, just a very final question. If you look at financial markets, they have completely almost ruled out that we don't get a deal. They believe a deal one way or another is gonna come. They're pretty certain about that. Would you say they're wrong?
Well, again, a week ago, I thought that the no deal scenario was the most likely, and I've been thinking that for months. But then we had this late turnaround of the British government, where actually they used a speech by Michel Barnier to backtrack from earlier statements. And that speech actually didn't say anything new, except that they wanted to portray it as a sea change in the EU's attitude, which was us not. But that told me that actually the British government, after all, wants a deal. So I would say that the Realos have won the ear of the Prime Minister, and therefore they are seeking a deal, which now leads me to believe that ultimately we're going to have one. Not a very ambitious one, but at least one that will avoid the UK crashing out of the transition period on January 1st.